Hey, hello, everybody. This is Stan Scott.
And this is Scott K.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Foggy Bottom Line podcast. You can see I've changed the background a little bit. Let us know what you think about that. Tried to improve the lighting, and the Scott is still sitting in his workshop, so probably out there building a shelf or something.
Yeah,
But
this is
today we
where the
want to talk
magic
a little bit
happens.
about that's where the magic happens, is in the workshop. And today we want to talk about a little bit about education. We want to focus on some sort of state level issues that are important as we get closer to the election in November, those statewide elections and the House of Delegates elections. And Scott, of course, is a candidate in House District 59. And one of the things that comes up a lot, if you look at the ads, is education. What's the parents' roles in the school? What's the government's role in the schools? People talking about school voucher, talking about failing public schools and these kinds of things. And I don't think we're going to get too much into the transgender thing very much, but we do want to talk about education policy, what it looks like today, and the kinds of things that Scott and I think should maybe change. So, initial thoughts on the subject there, Scott?
Well, I think it's really interesting that in the last few years, particularly, I think kind of triggered by COVID and kids being home, and parents being a little bit more involved in their kids' education, has really kind of triggered a lot of new debate about the value and quality of education and the role of parents in education. Uh, and it's become quite a divisive issue. Uh, the fault lines, the fissures were already there prior to COVID, but they've become more and more uh, salient. And I don't see us, at least in Virginia, making a lot of progress in addressing the issues. I just see a lot of debate and heated rhetoric around education and around the schools and around what happens at schools.
Well, and this heated rhetoric, I think, in large part comes from the part where these are children. These are parents with children, and they want their children to have the best life, the best education, and that kind of gives us an opportunity, I think, to circle back and talk about why we do this. What was the original idea behind public education? What's it for, right? And I think Horace Mann, isn't he? Wasn't he sort of the founder of American public education? You see a lot of that's why you see a lot of schools named after Horace
And
Mann,
horse math, yeah.
right? And I think that in large part, um, this happened as as America, as society generally throughout the world, sort of began to industrialize and technological change came on, and people didn't have to be subsistence farmers anymore. The family didn't have to have 9 children to work a farm or a ranch or something like that, and it became a tool for basically two things in my mind. And Scott, I'm interested in your take on this, but two things. One is to build community and to create a shared understanding of who we are as a people, what the government is for, and what it should and should not be doing, but also to prepare people for later life, right? Get them ready for a trade. A workshop like yours is helpful there, right? We need carpenters, we need furniture makers, but also to study science, to study aeronautics, to study biology, to study math, and to study the human condition, the social sciences. We're both political scientists and economists and things like that. So I think these are, just to go back to the main reasons we have public education in the first place. I think those are the two big things. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right. I think if we're really honest and we go back and look at the foundations of public education in the United States, it was a great experiment in social engineering, which I think we should be upfront about. And people don't necessarily like that term or what it might imply, but uh, the purposes were to build Americans, people with a common identity. We had a lot of, like we do today, uh, immigrant families, people who needed to be assimilated, acculturated, and we needed people to have a respect and understanding of our form of government. But there's also a capitalist economic purpose as part of that social engineering. It's to prepare a workforce. Uh, you know,
Right.
education was not created to prepare people to go to college. It was built and initially, and we've kind of gotten away from that. It was built to prepare people to enter the workforce either as a homemaker or
Right.
as a worker. Uh, and the collective benefit that was intended by those things, I think has a lot of value. And it, as we tend to do as Americans, we become more individualistic, and we're looking at
Mm.
it in terms of, does this work for me, or this isn't working for me, or I want it to work for me differently, uh, which is fair, but that should not override the collective value of education. And I think that whenever we talk about education today as social engineering, it just inflames uh, a lot of folks. But uh, countries need an engine that bring us together and to give us a common identity. There's a sort of a parallel to the military. When we had a draft, um, the military was a great homogenizer. It brought people from different ways of life, different language backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, put them together in close proximity and made them get to know each other and have to work with each other. And the end result is that we had a more cohesive and pluralistic society generally as a result of that. When we went to the volunteer force, that we still got some of that benefit, but it didn't touch as many people.
Right.
And public education, I think, uh, plays that same role. It kind of homogenizes us. It makes us Americans without a hyphen in it.
Right.
Uh, so I think that
Well,
besides imparting knowledge, that socialization role is critical to our public education system.
yeah, I agree, and I think one of the key benefits of public education, putting kids in classrooms with others in the community, creates a situation where you have people of different races and ethnic backgrounds, different languages, different capabilities in a room, or at least in a school together, interacting and learning about each other. And um, I think that this helps us understand each other a lot better. And I think one of the problems that you have, one of the problems you're going to get if you start trying to separate folks out, and then is that we don't develop this understanding of each other. And I think one of the
Right.
critical complaints that a lot of conservatives have about public education is the idea that public schools are indoctrinating kids in a certain ideology or a particular ideology that goes against their understanding of the way things ought to be. A lot of this is religious. They believe that the taking prayer and the Bible out of public schools, which never happened, by the way. It just meant that teachers couldn't lead the prayers, but there's still nothing that keeps students from praying in school if they want to do that. But you when you they complain that you take that out and now it's become too secular in some sense, but also too liberal. And this is especially a cogent attack on universities and colleges. But that shared understanding that we talk about, uh, that this is how things ought to be, like we used to say in the Army, this is what right looks like,
Right.
is something that that we can develop together if we're in a room together at a young age. And I'm not sure what you do about that because if you start talking about school voucher programs, basically taking money from public schools, giving it to parents so that they can choose their school, the school choice idea, right? That creates a separation and allows us to sort of self-select so that my kids aren't exposed to others who are not like me. They're not white. They're
Right.
not Southern, they're not American, they're not Christian, they're not whatever. It's this is the key complaint you see if you pay a lot of attention to conservative rhetoric on this subject. What do we do about
Yeah.
that? Do you think?
Well, first of all, schools were made to indoctrinate. That's part of education is
Right,
indoctrinating. That's why we have the Pledge of Allegiance to start the school day in
right,
school. That's an indoctrination into what it is to be an American and have certain
right,
American values. Places where they insist on having the Ten Commandments in the schools, that's indoctrination. Uh,
right,
that's teaching the children a certain way to be. Teaching any type of morality or ethics or way of treating each other, that's indoctrination or socialization. It's teaching people how to get along and
right,
enforcing those. That's what
right,
education is all about. Teaching kids that 2 plus 2 is always 4. If you want it to be 5, you can't just make it 5. Okay.
right,
Uh, so there are rules and there's right and wrong and there are bounds to what's true, what's real. Uh, where the breakdown happens is people objecting to or being afraid of a certain type of indoctrination that does or may not actually happen in schools. Or they want to impose their own indoctrination on children and reject the publicly acceptable one. Um, so people who want to homeschool or even parochial schools, Christian schools, their whole intent is to indoctrinate kids in a different way than what they're going to get in a public school.
right,
So let's take the value laden uh, term indoctrination and set it aside because that's what education and schools are all about, regardless which side of the argument you're on. So now, rather than arguing about are our kids being indoctrinated or not, let's agree that they are. But now we need to talk about what's that curriculum look like? What's that indoctrination?
right.
And is it one that brings us back together and makes us stronger collectively, gives us a stronger collective identity, or is it one that splinters us and fractures us and puts us back into our own little tribal units? And the right at the moment is opting for tribalism. The left really isn't doing very much. Hasn't really digested the issue. I don't think. Other
Mm-hmm.
than we've always had public schools, we should have public schools, and we're paying for pays for public schools. So, uh, but I think we need to come to terms with education. The purpose of public education in the United States is not just book learning. That's a good part of it, but part of
Right.
it is teaching people how to get along and how to see themselves as more than just an individual, to see themselves as part of a larger collective. Um,
Well, well, I think I would suggest to you, and tell me what you think about this, but I would suggest to you that one of the complaints that conservatives have about public education, especially at the higher levels, the later high school and college levels, is that there's an effort there to teach people to think critically, to evaluate
right.
evidence, and pay attention to what's true and what's not true. And it looks to me like one of the big problems we have right now, politically speaking, is that we don't really have a shared set of facts, right? There's a lot of things that we can't agree on whether it's true or not, right? Um, Including how do we measure some things. So, and what I think what a lot of capitalists would like to see public education do is just teach kids a job, right? Teach them how to run a bandsaw, right? Go back to the
Yeah,
woodworking thing,
yeah, and
how
there's
to
a
run a
lot of value
bandsaw,
in
how to
that.
run a table saw. Right. There's a lot of value in that. How to be a plumber. We got to have plumbers. We got to have someone to make furniture. We got to have someone that has these skills. But if you go too far down that trade role and that's the only thing you're teaching, then you create a situation where someone can say, "Wait a minute, 2 plus 2 is actually 5," and then and if people don't have the ability to evaluate that claim and examine it and and look at what evidence supports it and what evidence doesn't support it, then you create a situation where facts don't matter anymore, and you can just make them up. And this is one of the chief criticisms of Trump and the current conservative movement is they just make up facts. They say something, and then, just like Goebbels said, if you say it often enough, people will start believing it.
Right.
Very Orwellian. That to me, that's a critical thing for public education, is to teach kids how to think about things. How do I understand evidence? What qualifies as evidence? Right. It's interesting to me that, on the Epstein thing, and not to get too deep into this rabbit hole, but on the Epstein thing, you've got dozens of women saying one thing and one person saying another thing, and we believe the one person. And now, eyewitness testimony is the worst kind of evidence, but we need to understand this balance, and the preponderance of it seems to suggest one thing. And the same with math. The 2 + 2 is 5. We know we can prove that's not true, but if people don't know how to understand, how to evaluate that claim, then it doesn't matter if we can prove it, right?
Right. Right. So you're really triggering the postmodernist in me, the deconstructionist here.
Uh-oh, here we
Uh,
go.
yeah. Critical thinkers have always run into trouble with authority.
Yep,
Da Vinci, Galileo, any of these people who thought critically and were able to do what you're talking about, take information, process it, and draw their own conclusions. Uh, that's always been problematic to those in authority. It's still the same today, and I think that that's one reason why uh, our children aren't really taught critical thinking skills to the degree that they probably should be, because critical thinkers always challenge authority, and people in
right,
authority don't like to be challenged,
right,
um, which is a little bit different than declaring something that's just flat incorrect to be correct.
right,
It's different than uh, obvious things that are true. Like the Earth is not flat. Okay, we know
right.
that. We've seen it. The Earth is round, and so you don't need any critical thinking there. That's just a given. Uh,
Yeah,
so sometimes we conflate critical thinking with accepting a reality, or things that are established
right,
as known things. Um, so I'm not. I think everybody should have a limited or a certain amount of critical thinking skills, at least enough to determine what's BS and what's not. Just those rudimentary BS detection skills, which I don't think as a society we generally have right now. Um, but I don't know. I don't know where I was going with this. You just triggered the postmodernist in me here.
well, I'm a postmodernist as well. When I was studying IR theory, international relations theory, there are several schools of thought, and the one I generally agreed with is called the constructivist school, and it's this idea that we that a lot of truth is about how we talk about things, right? A lot of a lot of the way society is the way we talk about things. And I could go into deeper into this, and maybe I'll do a shorter video on it at some point. But at the end of the day, uh, to circle back to where we started here, because before we close out, I'd like to ask you your thoughts on what public school policy ought to look like in Virginia, so that we can start getting a sense of that, right? But
Before we
if
go
we
there,
accept,
let me just circle back around and kind of close out that last train of thought that I had.
sure, sure,
Uh, in our discussion here, we've been talking about parents and the role of parents in a child's education and parental preferences. So in this critical thinking model that I was talking about, the authority figures that are challenged by critical thinking are often the parents.
right,
And parents don't want to be challenged. Their faith
that's
leaders
right,
don't want to be challenged. Their baseball coaches don't want to be challenged.
right,
Uh, uh, so authority figures generally don't like to be challenged, which is one reason I think that consciously or not, we don't really train our children to become critical thinkers, because then they will just challenge us. And most of us are not up to that.
Right. And interesting you should say that because at the end of the day, I think the very first set of authority figures that children start practicing their challenging skills are going to be their parents. May,
Absolutely.
Maybe an older sibling, but what kid doesn't become a little bit rebellious when they enter the early teen years and start questioning whether the rules they live under are really the right ones and are really effective and are fair. Fairness is a huge component here, right? And part of the problem that conservatives have with public schools is that they don't want the entire history taught. They don't want everything taught, including the bad parts, right? And when we were kids, we glossed over things like slavery. We glossed over things like the Trail of Tears, and because that changes the way the kids grow up thinking about this shared understanding of who we are, this identity we have, right?
Right.
So if you're trying to create an identity of Americans as somehow exceptional because of the Constitution we created, because of the democracy we built, because of the capitalist system we built, which, although not completely fair for everyone, and it doesn't produce the outcomes free market, true believers would tell you it does, but it's still better than authoritarian communism, right? Where the distribution is unfair and it's arbitrary and decided on by someone who may not even have the knowledge that you need to do that correctly and do it well and make it good for balance the whole society out. But the you talk about challenging authority, and I think that's exactly right. And a lot of that's religious authority, a lot of it's government authority. And if people know, the more people know about where we really came from, it challenges their ability to sort of create this narrative about who we are as a people and who we are as an ethnos, which the term conservatives will use.
Yeah, not just who we
So
are, but what we do and what our policies are, and the
and
and
why are we
and
doing
why.
it? I mean,
Right.
yeah,
Uh,
right. So
and
yeah, so to to just to go back to the start where we sort of implied that there's basically two purposes behind public education. One is to create this shared understanding of who we are and what right looks like, and then another is to prepare people for the world after the adult world, the world they're going to
right.
be living in once they grow, once they become more independent, and that's both job skills, critical thinking, an understanding of history and where we came from, all these things. So, given if you accept that premise, and I guess we'll do that just for time constraints, but if you accept that premise, what do let me know some of your thoughts on where you think policy ought to go. Well, I mean, we have a lot of public school policy now that conservatives would push that would take money out of public schools, put it into things like charter schools, which are separate schools run by profit, sometimes for-profit organizations, but they're non-government organizations, even though they are publicly funded. Maybe handing money to parents, just cash money, right,
Mhm.
according to how much that student would have cost the public school system if they were in it, so that they can go get a private school education or a religious school education if they want to. Um, what do you think? I mean, Virginia right now doesn't really have any of that, right? We have
Right.
some charter schools, we have some magnet schools, but we're not in a voucher system yet. Although the Winsome Earl Searses of the world would push that. What do you think? Where do you think we ought to go with this, and how do you think you would protect the public schools if you were if you had a say in that?
Right. So it comes back to the whole purpose of education again, as we discussed. Uh, Breaking out of the public school system is is rejecting the stated purpose of public education, and it's a choice to fragment and to go off and break away from the collective, to not be a part of
Right.
the whole team, but to create your own team. And there's a lot of reasons that people might want to do that. But as a society, I think we need to say, no, there's more collective value, or there's more value to society as a whole to have this common collective identity. Now, we haven't been really good over the years at actually implementing that. We had school segregation and uh,
Mm,
all kinds of issues that we've had to work through over the years. So it's not a perfect system. So I wouldn't want to say that the public schools have always done what they should be doing. Uh, but to allow people to break away and to disassociate themselves from that public good of education, I think is divisive and it should not be uh, an easily attainable policy goal, I guess I would say. So I can see some rationale for subsidizing uh, alternative tracks to education, but I don't think that public dollars should go to fund, whether it's in the form of vouchers or direct funding or grants, should go to fund education that's not in the interest of the whole. Um, and I don't know if we're going to get to this or not, but I think one of the issues that's been developing, and as I talk to people here on the campaign trail, I hear more and more is, the cost of higher education, the cost of,
right.
post public school education. Um, and should it be that much? And should we have a student loan forgiveness and things like that? And I think those are great topics to talk about, but I think there's one that we should talk about even before that, and that is when we talk about higher education, we're assuming that we're talking about college. Uh, but secondary education should be, or higher education, is anything past grade 12. And we should include in higher education uh, apprenticeship programs, trade school programs. Uh, we've adopted a mythology that everyone needs to go to college. You can't get a good job unless you go to college. But the economic realities are, if you go to college, all you do is end up in debt, and you're probably making less money than somebody who's working in the trades. Uh, so we need to prioritize uh, the trades and apprenticeships, non-college higher education options, and take the pressure
Right.
off the university systems, the college systems, and get people into the workforce in more productive ways. One of the reasons we have an immigration problem is we don't have enough skilled tradesmen to build houses, uh,
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I agree with that.
or to lay bricks, or
Right.
uh, to do those things. So we have to import those skill sets because we're not developing them ourselves. So
Yeah.
I think we need to really broaden the idea of what higher education is, and maybe even return back to a more literal meaning of preparing people to enter the workforce, uh, and take some of the stigma off uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
of trades versus uh, uh, white collar, blue collar versus white collar.
Well, I tell you what, Scott, I think that we should probably consider uh, diving a little bit deeper into this next week, because I think there's a broader discussion to have the about higher education, specifically university and college education, and how the costs have gone up and why. And I think that's a useful discussion to have. And I think that's also an issue that we should be talking about as Virginians and how this works in Virginia. Um, but we, but we, but I think it's a separate conversation, and maybe next week we can continue the education theme and dig into that a little bit more. I do totally agree with you that the we have to start thinking about higher education in a broader context. And I think one of the things, you make a good point about immigration. I think this is an um sort of an underestimated part of the problem, because the typical discussion around immigration is, well, we have to import these people because they do jobs Americans don't want to do.
Mhm.
And I think to a certain extent, there's something to that, especially on the agricultural sector. But when you talk about things like construction and factory jobs, right, manufacturing, it might be that they have skilled people in places like Mexico, because Mexico's not really a third world country anymore. I've been
Mhm.
there several times, and it's a vital community, right? They build good, I mean, they build a lot of good stuff there, and they have intelligent, well trained people, and they're being trained in things that Americans are not being trained in, right? The
Right.
construction, plumbing, painting, these kinds of things that you know. A lot of us think, oh, I just need to go down to Home Depot and buy a couple of gallons of paint and some brushes, and I can paint the house. And you theoretically could, but it might not be the same standard of quality work you really want when you're trying
Mhm.
to protect an investment like a house, right? But I think that's a key point, and I think that one of the things that the General Assembly could do and the Virginia government could do is start thinking about what this looks like, how to fund it, and then how to explain to people that that you're right. We have this myth that everyone needs to go to college, and I think in the 50s and 60s, when you still had a situation where most Americans had never had any education past the 12th grade, and many had never been past the 8th grade, that made a lot of sense,
Right.
right? It made a lot of sense to do that. But at this point, when we have a lot of people who have a lot of, I probably have more education than anyone ever needs who's not a rocket scientist, right?
Right.
But the I, what's has that gotten me some jobs? Has that improved my life? It certainly improved my ability to think about what's going on around me and understand it
Mhm.
better and evaluate truth from non-truth. But it hasn't made me a billionaire, right? And in fact,
Right.
some of these billionaires, Bill Gates never finished college, right? One of my brothers never
Zuckerberg.
finished
Yes.
college, but he makes truckloads of money writing code for Google, right?
Mhm.
So I think we really need to carefully consider the importance of this and try to channel folks into the pathways that they believe are best for them,
Right.
right? And not try to say, well, you're going to college because I went to college and Grandpa went to college and everybody in the family goes to college. That's just as sort of sideways as, well, you got to join the army because I was in the army and Grandpa was in the army and great grandpa was in the army and everybody in this family joins the army. People have to find their pathway, is what I'm saying, I guess.
Right. So, really, Stan, this reminds me that all the issues that we're dealing with right now, the political and economic issues, they're all interrelated. As we talk about emphasizing uh, uh, development of trade skills as an alternative to college, we have structural things that interfere with that. We have this notional right to work law
Right,
that keeps unions from forming or workers from organizing. And one of the key fundamental things that a union does that relates to this is they have apprenticeship programs where they
right,
train people and they certify them. They make sure that they have the skills and abilities that they have. Uh,
right,
so I guess my point is that to solve a problem over here, we need to look at what are the structural things, what are the other problems over here we need to address. And I see a
right.
direct relationship that others may not between unions and the right to work laws here in Virginia and solving this higher education issue that we're facing.
And I think here's another point that you just made that a lot of people don't think about and is really underreported, and that is the role of unions in education,
Right.
right? And the unions take young people who want to go into the trades and teach them how to do it. And it's not a university classroom. It's often not a classroom at all. But if you want to be an electrician, you need to study under an electrician. Just like if you want to be a political scientist, you have to study under a political
Yeah.
scientist.
And if we
And
start calling it higher education, it's going to be a more attractive option to a lot
right,
of folks and to a lot
I
of parents.
totally agree. And if you start sort of formalizing this, first of all, strengthening the unions so that they have the fiscal ability to do this, but also formalize it in a way that connects it to the kind of critical thinking training that people need as well, right? Then you could end up with a hybrid where someone takes a community college class in ethics, for example, or social sciences, or just English, and then does the apprenticeship the rest of the day. And over the course of a year, you end up with both skills. You end up learning to understand evidence and think critically, but you also end up becoming a good electrician who can make a very good living wiring houses and businesses and repairing
Right.
things for people. And none of us can make that can get all can train all those skills, right?
Right.
If
Right.
I'm not silly enough to try to wire my house, I'd kill myself, right?
Right.
I got to hire somebody to do that, and
Right.
we need to have those people with those skills out there. So
Yeah. So
okay,
Stan, I know I led us down a couple rabbit holes here in our conversation
that's
earlier,
what we do, sir.
but
It's what we do,
yeah, yeah, give two old soldiers a microphone. Uh,
right?
but
We just
there's one other critique about public education or issue that I think we need to address. I know that you feel the same way. Is we lack an adequate civics education for our young people, and candidly, our our adults.
right,
I think we stopped doing formal civics education uh, somewhere in the mid 70s, late or early 80s. It was one of those programs that just kind of got cut out. Um, but we're suffering the consequences of that. Over the years, as an election official, interacting with people after an election, how come this happened? How come that happened? How come this isn't an issue that can be addressed by this level of government? It really occurred to me how civics illiterate most Americans are.
mm-hmm.
And I think those who, just yesterday, there was a naturalization ceremony. Uh, I think down in Tidewater, the governor was there. Uh, but to be naturalized, uh, the people have to pass a test, a basic civics test about
Right,
American government. What are the three branches of government? What is the Constitution? Uh, those things. And I think most Americans, and I think there's been some anecdotal research to support this, that most Americans can't pass that test.
right,
And we need to start teaching our children about civics, about our form of government, about how to engage constructively in society and to be an active participant. And then we need to go back and give remedial courses to the parents and grandparents.
right. And that's I kind of appreciate you bringing that up because this is in my academic career, what I mostly taught was civics, was how the U.S. government works. And I believe that one of the reasons we see less of that, especially at younger ages. Now, I've taught this to kids at the senior high school level, right? And first, freshman, sophomore, college level. I think one reason we stopped doing this for younger kids, you and I got this in the what, fifth grade, sixth grade
Or, yeah, eighth
time
grade, I
frame.
think. I
You know,
specifically
very
remember
very
eighth grade
basic,
civics.
very
Yeah,
basic stuff. How a bill becomes law, and none of us understood it really, right? Well,
yeah,
we were able to pass the multiple choice test, but it doesn't really take at that age, and maybe that's part of it. But I also think this indoctrination problem is part of that too, because when uh, you start teaching American government, your kids are going to start asking, well, why do we do it that way? And for most of them, well, the founders were brilliant, and that's what they thought up, right? That's the way they wrote it down.
mhm,
It isn't a good enough answer, and that's a good thing for to have them question that. But parents, like you just said a little while ago, don't like to be questioned on things like that. They want the rote memorization, multiplication tables, right? This is what conservatives, in fact, tend to mean when they say we need to get back to the, reading, writing, arithmetic in schools. Is we just want to teach this rote memorization, and it's not so important that we teach people how things work and how it got to be that way. But real quick, I'm going to plug a project that I've been working on, and I'm planning to start taping some of the lectures next week. And these lectures will be basically a class in U.S. government, so a civics class, the Constitution, the history of the Constitution, how it works, right? What the opposing forces are, a little bit about why we see things going the way they're going now. But I teach this class from a historical perspective. So I talk about the Constitution in terms of uh, what were the social and technological forces that sort of forced them to do it the way they did it, right? Slavery being one of them, militias being another, things like that. But we'll talk about this more on the podcast as well. But these will be separate. It's part of my project to do what you're talking about, Scott, because you're right. There's a lot of adults out there who don't really understand how this works. They don't understand why it's so important that we have good, solid, intelligent, thoughtful people in these government roles. They don't understand why it matters that Trump has basically fired all the competent people in the federal government, or all the ones he could find anyway,
Right.
replaced them with people because they're loyal, whether they're competent or not, right? And some of them certainly are, I'm sure. Just the laws of probability would suggest that some of them
Yeah.
will be. But this is a critical issue, I think, and I appreciate you bringing it up because it gives me a chance to plug that, and more to come on that, folks, in sort of separate venues. But you're right that it's we don't teach that. Education is in a lot of ways broken in this country, but it's not because we don't teach how to write in cursive anymore, right?
Right.
It's because we're not teaching kids how to deal with and manage the society they live in, and how to understand what's going on around them, how to how to identify what is objectively true and what is not objectively true. There's still people out there that believe the Holocaust never happened, and that's not really debatable. Flat Earth, you talked about that a minute ago.
Mhm.
It's not debatable anymore. These are facts, and we need to come to grips with them. Slavery happened in the U.S. Some of the founders owned slaves, right? That is something we need to come to grips with as a country, and not try to sweep it under the rug like the conservatives are trying to do now.
Right. And I think you bring up an important point. Um, is we have these high ideals for what America is or what it should be, and they're really aspirational rather than reality.
Right.
And we need to continue to aspire to achieve those ideals rather than give up because we haven't achieved them yet.
Right.
Uh, and sometimes perfection is the enemy of good.
Right.
And as we pursue perfection and as we aspire to fulfill the real ideals of what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution offer us, we're not there, but we should appreciate where we are at as being a good place and a good thing, and use that confidence and reassurance to increase our efforts and increase our strides to trying to achieve this more uh, perfect union, more noble ideal of what we are as Americans. And that's what makes me optimistic and
Right.
about our future. Is there are people like you and others that understand that we're not there yet, but we're still trying, and we shouldn't take a side path. We should continue down this road till we achieve this more perfect union.
Scott, there's not a single one of us anywhere, not a single individual anywhere, who can't look in the mirror at themselves and think to themselves, I should not have done that. Whatever it was
Mhm.
that we all did something in our past, made a bad decision, were mean to someone, mistreated someone, did something that we shouldn't have done, and we regret that. And the only way to overcome that, the whole concept of forgiveness of sin is built around admitting to yourself that you did something you shouldn't have done, and promising yourself you're going to do better, and then doing the best you can to do better. And we need
Right.
to do that as a country as well. And if we're going to get there, like you said, to get to that more perfect union that we have not yet achieved, education is a critical piece to that. Because if we don't understand what really happened in our past, the original sins that America, that the European settlers, and that the early American colonists, and then the early Americans under the Constitution did. We did some bad things, and we need to own up to that and understand how we need to change in order to be better. And education, public education for everyone, is a key component to that in my mind.
Absolutely.
So, well, we're right at 45 minutes. So I think we'll wrap this one up, this episode up. More to come on education, more to come on a lot of subjects, including some other silly things eventually. Right now, we're focusing on sort of policy in Virginia as we get closer to the election. I think early voting starts tomorrow. Is that right?
That's right.
Early voting starts tomorrow. So you could vote tomorrow and look on your local county website to see where you can go do that. If you're in Virginia, that is. If you're not in Virginia, then maybe not. But early voting in Virginia starts tomorrow. The election is on November 4th. It's starting to heat up a little bit, starting to see more ads. I know, Scott, you're getting pretty busy running around talking to people, and that's a good thing because that's what candidates ought to be doing, and Buddy Fowler's not doing that as far as I can see. But well, more to come next time. We're going to wrap this one up. As always, Scott, your pluggables, what are you, your website, Scott K4VA, the number 4.com, right?
That's right. And follow on social media, Alex Scott K at HD59. It's my honor to be able to aspire to office, to try to make this Commonwealth and our country a better place. If you like the ideas that you're hearing, I would appreciate hearing from you, getting your support, and vote Scott K on November 4th.
And we need thoughtful, intelligent people in government, both liberal and conservative. The key piece is the thoughtful and thoughtful and intelligent part. The people who can be convinced that they're wrong when they're wrong. You can see some of the Foggy Bottom Line stuff up on the screen behind me. You can see it on the screen in front of you. The social media Foggy Bottom Line stuff, and Scott's website. As always, let us know how you think we're doing. If you think the production values need some changes, if you have a topic you'd like for us to go over, let us know. We want to hear from you about how we can improve. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that through Venmo, and you can do that through Patreon. So I think we'll sign off now. Scott, any last words before we close?
I know we'd appreciate your feedback. We aspire to be podcasters, so help us get there. Help us improve our presentation and give us some ideas for future topics of discussion.
Yeah, like Scott said, we're just a couple of old soldiers with a microphone, trying to get some thoughts out there, trying to do better for everyone, trying to improve things, improve the world around us, and just share our thinking. And we'd love to hear your thinking on these things as well, good or bad. If you disagree, we want to know that too, because Scott and I know we're not right about everything. So if you think we're wrong, let us know, and we'll evaluate that. So take care, Scott. Enjoy the rest of your day and week. I'll get this up as quick as possible, and we'll move on from there.
Okay.
Okay.
Carry on, my friend.
Carry on, sir. Have a good one. Enjoy your day.
Bye-bye.
Peace. Bye. Okay. I'm going to stop the recording.